5:05, so we'll get the meeting going. Might as well just start off with introducing Brianna. How do you say it? Pinero?
Panera.
Pinero,
Yep.
new member sworn in last month, right?
Yep.
And her first meeting, so say
Yes.
hi to the kid.
Welcome aboard.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
We're
Thank
glad
you.
to have you. Thank you for your interest, and I hope it meets your expectations. And I'm sure you'll be a great contributor.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
So is everything on the agenda, given the quorum that we have, still
Yeah, so
relevant?
we can't vote on really anything other than minutes. So most of what we have here is just kind of status updates for a few different initiatives that Lauren and I are working on.
Okay.
Just going into it first, at a meeting in the fall, I remember I had a meeting with the committee discussing a potential project looking into both our commercial and industrial zone properties.
Right.
Both for their effectiveness in terms of where they're currently located, what zoning uses are there, or getting the most out of our existing zoning. This stems from, while it's still being reviewed by the planning board, this stems from our master plan that's currently in the phase of hopefully being adopted. Reviewing our zoning map in general is always important from time to time, as well as with the bylaws, which we'll go into next. And so this is we found a program through MAPC. It's their technical assistance program. Truly, it's what it sounds. We work with staff from MAPC on just a review of our zoning, specific to commercial and industrial development, our zoning map, and then just kind of where it stands, both regionally, if we're measuring up in terms of the highest and best use of the land. Another element to this that's really key with any sort of MAPC program is equity. So that element to this is interesting because we're thinking of commercial and industrial development, we're thinking of from more of an economic standpoint, but it also looks into historically where these locations are zoned in the town. Do they make sense?
What does that mean?
So,
You know what it means. Just say it. We all know. Just say it.
a lot of it is zoned within South and East Walpole. So
Right.
those are more or less historically where a lot of workforce housing was
Yeah.
for machine. And
Right.
so that's, when we look at it from an equity standpoint, we look at whether or not that zoning makes sense in what has become more residential areas. How has society's changed in terms of where we put our commercial development. I mean, I'm always big on advocating for Route 1.
Makes sense.
It's our commercial corridor, and I think a lot of it now, you don't see people having the plants next to the river, next to the, next to a residential neighborhood. So that's where that equity element comes into this project.
So are they saying that, hey, a lot of these traditionally zoned industrial commercial areas are now becoming more residential, so maybe it makes sense to look at it to move those, to change those classifications to residential? Or are they saying it's not fair that people in 1,400 square foot Capes get all the commercial and people in 4,000 square foot North Walpole houses don't get any?
I think it's a variety of things, and both of it kind of would come. The process is mostly to come away with recommendations on how we can improve our zoning map. But it's a lot of, at least how Lauren and I have kind of are working on the application, how we're kind of visioning it. We have pre-existing non-conforming uses, so we have residential that is in commercial development. We have commercial development and residential development that may not be adequate anymore. And so
Sure.
I wouldn't necessarily think of wholesale swap and saying hey, this whole area is industrial, we're now changing it to residential. That's not what it's about. But I think it's about, does the use that's currently allowed in that area make sense?
Which the word should be optimized, but as soon as they
Yeah.
bring in the word equity, it makes me wonder what the goal is. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with equity at all,
Yeah.
but when you go into when you're looking at something to evaluate if it's in the best classification for where we are 2024,
Mhm.
there are a lot of reasons why that would change, right? Like we
Yeah.
just said, right? And I just hope those reasons are appropriate
Yeah.
and don't start to fall into income guidelines and things like that, where it's saying that's not equitable, you know, that,
Yeah, I mean, that element is well, it wasn't originally something that when I kind of thought about when I was, you know, looking at the master plan, thinking of the project. It's an element to the grant application itself, but it does kind of fit in a little bit in terms of historically where we have a lot of limited manufacturing zone property.
sure.
And not to say that I would just, hey, that's now going to be zone residential, but I think more or less, do some of those commercial uses, are they make sense in an area that is
Applicable
really,
today.
yeah,
Applicable today.
No,
Like
that's
down
not
by-
like your word
yeah,
of
optimized,
optimized.
yeah,
as opposed-
optimized.
yeah.
Could they be better located in a pure industrial district or in
Right.
a highway business?
And that makes perfect
Yeah.
sense, and if you would come down and say, hey, I'm putting together this,
Yep.
you know, this study,
Mhm.
and you mentioned equity, I would know exactly where you were coming from, but when the state mentions equity, to me, that's a totally different thing.
Yes.
And again, I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent, but I know what the state's goal is. So I don't wanna start seeing, you know where I live downtown. I have no skin in this game at all. But I don't think it would be appropriate for them to say we want 7-Elevens up on North Street. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
Same.
that's,
Yeah.
that's my concern with the state saying the word equity, not you.
I got you. No, I
Yeah.
mean, I can understand that, but I think MAPC, when they look at it, at least just from my history of working with them, it's really what is the highest and best use of the land.
Sure.
Not just about economically, but from practicality of how we live,
Yeah.
where we work, and so.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I
That's-
mean,
But this is a consultancy review or assistance, whatever comes
Yep.
out of here still has to
Oh,
go
yeah.
through the whole town process.
Yeah,
And the
absolutely.
zoning board. and the
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
town meeting, et cetera.
So-
So this is just to get the assistance to look at the pie and a recommendation of what to put in the pie.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one, we got to apply. We got to finalize our application. But Lauren and I
Oh,
talked to
okay.
the program director last week, and it was pretty. It was an
Have you
optimistic.
lost one lately? You win more grants than anyone I have ever seen in that seat.
I thank you, but it is. The state has a lot of great resources out there, and it's.
Yeah, no, you're
Yeah,
doing a
they-
great job.
yeah,
I
They're still
appreciate
giving
that.
out COVID money, come
Yeah.
on.
That's right, that's
Yeah,
right.
they are. But no, so this one, to Kevin, your point, it is really just, we're coming away with, hey, you could look at doing this, this, and this. We could look at getting additional funding and expanding it, and maybe it becomes more as they're gonna write the zoning for us. But right now, I really want to have this tie into our third item, which is something that we already have funding for, which is a zoning audit and recodification project. This is also something that stems from the master plan, but it's really been something that since I've got here has been brought to my attention from a variety of different ways. That, you know, when town does a zoning audit, to really kind of explain that, it's really just looking at it from a legal standpoint, looking at it from a formatting standpoint, and cleaning up the zoning. It's not
There's
so
a lot
much
of redundancy and there's a lot of
inconsistency.
inconsistent and opposing views sometimes, depending on where you read in the zoning bylaws. You
Absolutely.
could get two different stories altogether, so
It
definitely
is.
needed.
Yeah, it really is, because I think, and you know, from being on the planning board, Mark,
Right.
it really is just about ease of use in the sense of like as a planning board member, as a you know, as a building department, as just even a developer coming to town, you miss things, and so some things don't get cleaned up over time because you keep on adding, you're removing, and so this is really just, think of it more or less as cleaning up the zoning bylaws for inconsistencies.
Right.
So that project, we're getting going with that. We're likely going with, you know, probably from more of a legal standpoint rather than a planning standpoint, which I think is this type of project warrants. So it's really
Is that gonna be a consultant as well, or are you doing it in-house?
Likely in-house, from like in terms of council, but it's still really, we're still looking at it.
Yeah, good.
You know, but at least that's where that project is at. We
That
got-
first study will probably help out a lot.
That's kind of what I was thinking
Yeah.
in terms of the information from that could hopefully maybe be tied into this project later on.
'Cause I think you probably want to know what we're looking at in terms of the first project,
Yeah.
in terms of, hey, where do we really stand?
Mhm.
Okay, now let's go back and clean up the bylaws based on 2024, as opposed to clean up what was written in 1995,
Yeah.
and then maybe have to go back in and change it all again.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
And it's funny how you mentioned that. So it's like the MAPC one, I'm thinking of a 6 to 12 month project. The zoning bylaw auto recodification, I'm judging it based upon when the grant funding is supposed to be spent by, which is by July of 25. So that project itself, towns can look at it from a variety of ways. The best way, from at least my discussion with town council and talking to a few different planners that are going through it, is like a phased approach. Whereas you look at it like, we're gonna clean up the inconsistencies, the formatting, then we're gonna look at use and dimension, and then we're gonna go into section by section, how are they compliant with current state laws, a lot of that. Because if you just were to tackle it as, one town meeting process, people are probably gonna be questioning, hey, there's a 200-page article of bylaws,
Right.
it's daunting. So it would be more phased, and I think where it comes in with that MAPC program, that'd probably be more of like a last phase.
Are you getting any pushback from the chair of the planning board?
Well, no, so we want to bring that project to them. So right now, why I'm hesitant with it in the sense of, we have the funding, we're pursuing basically what is the options for consulting services, but that project still needs to be kind of discussed and brought
Yeah.
to them. as well.
Has it been discussed with them yet? Just out of curiosity. The
will be.
the audit.
The audit,
The first, the consultant in the grant, that's needed right off the bat.
yeah, that's.
But
really-
the audit, I think you're gonna get some pushback from the
Yeah, no,
chair.
it's going to.
Yeah.
That's why we're kind of in limbo right now.
Yeah.
The funding was secured through just an application that stems from last spring.
Yeah.
So the program that it applies for, it's a really long period from when you apply
Right.
to when you find out. So that's why it's like, hey, we got the funding, but we need to checks and balances.
Sure.
We need to check with everybody before we truly move forward with it, which,
Didn't he write half of the old bylaw?
Who?
What's his name? The chair of the planning board,
Conroy?
Conroy. He wrote most of the
Been around a long
the
time.
original, yeah. He's been around since the late 80s, I think, right? Early 90s. That's why he knows it so well. You've sat in those meetings. You don't want to go toe to toe with him. You don't want to swap leather with him when it comes to the zoning bylaws, because I think he wrote half of it. But anyway,
Yeah.
regardless,
Yeah.
makes no difference.
So that's a project, though, to your point.
Yeah.
We want to bring people along to it.
Sure.
It's not trying to overstep anyone. It's really just legally. It's not planning, it's cleaning. So,
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, I've been off planning board now for years, but even back then, we would spend so much time arguing two valid points in the same set of zoning bylaws,
yeah.
where one says you can do this and one says you can do that.
Yeah.
It's like, which one is it?
But that's what you wanna do, the audit,
Yeah,
clean up the
exactly,
legal.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing.
So that's basically where those stand. I know we're kind of moving along from just status updates, but the other one is MBTA, which I know I've discussed with this group a few times. That was recently put on the warrant by the select board, so they are sponsoring what the current draft is, which I've included in board materials. So a few different things for this. So because it being a zoning bylaw, there will need to be the regulatory public hearing process with the planning board. The steering committee that was appointed by the select board that I'm working with on it, we're still going to be meeting, probably actually meeting next week to kind of review it a little bit further. We want to have a public forum likely in March with town meeting members, anyone that's interested in attending from the general public, butters in the surrounding area. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the steering committee in terms of their thought that went into this. It was a really kind of an interesting understanding of trying to, I don't want to say like mitigate density. So there's certain requirements we need to meet from the state. Those are, can't change those. Those are the guidelines that Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities kind of put forward for towns to follow. But they looked at it as an interesting approach, as like a sub-district approach, trying to have the core of the downtown where the higher density is already located. We've seen the bigger mixed-use projects, and then have an outer core district as more of a kind of transitional zone between the surrounding neighborhoods. So it's almost like bookends to the district along 1A. So it's not everything all at once. It's just gradual build up to a higher density from a zoning standpoint.
Where do we stand now, though? I mean, are we even close to where we need to be?
So
It's all net new though, right?
that's the thing. It's
It's all
not,
net new?
Yeah.
I thought, yeah.
There's no look at what your existing is, because it's not about construction, it's about zoning. So zoning is looking at what a theoretical build out would be for each individual parcel that is within that district. So there's no requirement to build. There's always
Right.
requirements, though. I try to emphasize that, and there's no look at it in terms of like, oh, this many units. There's somewhat of a what if. Obviously, there's always the potential to what building can be, but there's also a more practical and realistic look at it when, you know, we have property on here that has been recently developed for a project.
Right.
They're not tearing that down tomorrow and building something new. But zoning is really it's guidelines to what future development can be, but there's no actual requirement that any of this get built. It's only that it meets those guidelines that the state wants us to meet for how it should look. And part of that looks, in terms of our existing zoning, is we allow mixed use. We don't allow multifamily. So that's the main requirement overall from this whole law, is that multifamily needs to be allowed by right within a district of a certain size, of a certain density. And so this area in general it fits the requirements because of where it's located to the train station. It's within a half mile, it's over 50 acres. It also has certain development that is consistent with what's being proposed. You have larger mixed-use projects. That being said, we can still allow for mixed use. There's mixed use allowed within this zoning, but a developer also has the option that you don't need to comply with this zoning. You can utilize the underlying zoning. That doesn't, this only supersedes if you're looking to build a project under this zoning. So if you were to say, hey.
So if somebody comes in and says, I want to do this under this zoning, under this program,
Yeah.
it's by right?
So, so it's by right, but you still have site plan review. By right just essentially means that it does not need to go for an additional special permit for the use. So, an interesting way of looking at it is, in the central business district, mixed-use projects like Liberty Station, Union West, that use is allowed by right. It still requires site plan review process. If I am a developer and I have this zoning passed, you could pursue a mixed-use project under the existing zoning, or you could pursue a mixed-use project under this overlay district. You have that option to utilize the underlying zoning if you still want to.
Got it.
So I know that's.
So,
But can they go in for non-mixed use under the MBTA use, even though this
As-
all gets rezoned as commercial mix, or as mixed use?
Yeah, so
right?
we can't restrict it to mixed use only.
Okay.
So it has to have the allowance for multifamily. You can
Okay.
incentivize mixed use, which is what we did. We tried to basically allow for a greater height for mixed use within the central core, as well as have reduced parking requirements. Not to go too much into the weeds, but if you're doing a mixed use project in the central business district now, your residential component is a maximum of 3.5 times the commercial floor area of the commercial component. So if I have 100,000 square foot, commercial building, if I want to have residential above it, I can have 350,000 square feet of residential. That's just using simple numbers. If you're doing something like that, sometimes you see developments where you have an excessive amount of commercial space because it meets their numbers for residential. That's not always beneficial because we're not even using some of this commercial space, we have excessive commercial space in mixed-use developments.
Right.
A mixed-use project under this zoning, the commercial component only needs to be street facade facing. So you can have, 1,500, 2,000 square foot rentable commercial spaces along, say, Main Street. But you don't need to have all this excessive commercial space in order to account for your residential space.
Do we like this?
So select board voted to sponsor it.
No, I don't mean that. I mean,
Do-
do all the towns that are involved in this, would they rather this not be something, or are they happy it's something?
Milton was not happy.
Milton's.
Milton's never happy.
Truthfully, I think a lot of surrounding towns have looked at mixed-use overlays or trying to incentivize mixed use in their downtown for a number of years before this came out. And I'm thinking of that just surrounding us. So, we're looking at Norwood and Dedham and Canton and, Sharon to some smaller extent. So a lot of Norfolk, I know just passed something, but from a planning standpoint, it's not a new concept. Trying to, hey, you allow residential in your downtown or mixed use within your downtown, you'll hopefully try to get more of a lively commercial presence there. You bring people to the train station. There's usually hopefully a spin-off of having new commercial development. But
So is there any risk of, and this might be a dumb question, it's just because I don't know, but let's say someone wants to take advantage of this overlay, build a residential, whatever,
Multifamily
or then
Yep.
multifamily project. Is there any overlap or marriage of any 40B projects and this overlay? Where you can't stop them no matter what, they're gonna take advantage of this, and 40B is gonna make it so you can't even tell them.
so 40B is a whole separate.
I get it, but is
So-
there any right to marry the two? Like, you couldn't put a 40B in downtown Walpole,
You
right?
could if you wanted to. You could put a 40B anywhere.
You got the handshake
Yeah.
40B at,
Yeah,
Gilmore.
Yeah,
Yeah, truthfully, they try to emphasize, they try to emphasize 40B projects being closer to public transit,
Right.
but it's not a requirement.
Right.
You can put a 40B development anywhere, that's why it circumvents your zoning. When you look at this, there is an affordable requirement that we included, and it's really a measure of trying to have some,
is it the same affordable?
No,
ratio
so
of-
we're
no?
limited, what the state deems as a by right affordable is limited to 10% of a development at 80% area median income. So that is considered affordable. Anything beyond that, you have to go and do an economic feasibility analysis to basically prove to the state that, hey, we can handle a higher affordability percentage within this overlay district. We kept it at 10%, it's the minimal allowance, but right now we don't have anything. So by having an affordable component to your zoning, it's really keeping your numbers, and what I mean by that is your subsidized housing inventory, which is the units that fall under the state's determination as affordable. So we look at a project like Gilmore's you put in there, so 25% need to be affordable, and what happens is for a 40B project, if it's rental, all the units, even the market rate ones, count towards our SHI numbers. So in a development like this, if you were to build a 100-unit project and 10% are affordable, so 10 are affordable, only that 10% count as affordable, not the entire project, because
Right.
it's not being done as a 40B development, it's being done as in a, I don't want to say inclusionary zoning, but it's basically being done as a town's
Yeah, okay.
affordability requirement for development. So it's less than what a 40B project would be. It's beneficial for the town because we're always increasing our denominator in terms of housing stuff. So you're always building, and if you're not keeping that numerator up, right, in terms of your affordable units,
Right.
then your percentage goes down lower, and you're susceptible to 40B developments where
Sure.
you don't have a say in it. So,
And then with this, it's obviously you're not touching, until they start building, you're not touching the numerator or the denominator.
yeah,
Right.
it's interesting. They look at that denominator. So right now, from the 2020 census, we have 10,042 dwelling units. However, from like the SHI count, it's actually 10,001 because they look at year-round housing units. So apparently, there's 41 not year-round housing units in Walpole. But either way, that number sticks.
Vacation spot.
Summer,
Okay,
along
yeah,
the
summer
pond
home.
for summer homes.
So they look at it in 10-year increments based upon the census. So it's not like, that denominator is keeping up at the same time as those
Sure.
units are being recorded. So when censuses come out, that's usually when you see towns fall out of 10%. And if they're not providing affordability in a way like this in the interim, they find themselves in a situation where all of a sudden we can't prevent a 40B project because
Yeah, I'm not saying I even want to prevent them, I'm
No,
just
no, no,
curious
no.
as to how they work together.
yeah, there's not to go too much in the weeds, but there's a different variation called like a 40R. It's a smart growth overlay district where a town can basically, it usually works with a developer that's doing what would be a 40B project within an area close to public transit. But it involves a zoning change to create your smart growth overlay district, and the project actually goes through planning board, not zoning board, but it functions the same as a 40B project. That's not related to this, but from the state standpoint, it could be, but we don't have a 40R district, so we're not doing that.
Who drew up, oh, go ahead.
No, you can go.
Who drew this map?
So this was done in cooperation, like the boundaries of which were done in cooperation between,
Between
The
Swan Pond and
consultant-
everybody else?
no, between the consultant and
Considering
the
they were
steering committee.
conspicuously left off?
Well, we're looking at it from both an acreage standpoint and then a density standpoint. So you increase your acreage.
You did.
You increase your acreage too much, then you find yourself having your density numbers lower than,
Sure.
than what you want. So because there's a build-out requirement, a build-out number, a hypothetical build-out number of like 1,500 units. So the zoning factors in what that hypothetical build-out based upon your dimensional regulations, height, parking. It gets a little bit complicated, and I try to veer away from going too far into it because there's literally an Excel that I use to kind of that the state put out. It's got some algorithm in there that help kind of calculate the density. I didn't set it up, I just know when we worked with our consultant, we provided basically the district bounds. They look at the parcel information, and that's how they're able to kind of calculate what the build-out numbers would be based upon the dimensions you require. So if you make a district too large, then your dwelling units per acre number is gonna shrink, and you need to keep that dwelling units per acre number over 15. Right now, the way it's built out, we're at 20, 21 dwelling units per acre as a district overall. Even though you have the blue area, the outer core is at 20 dwelling units an acre, that the central core is 45 dwelling units an acre. However, it factors out based upon what is buildable area, comes out to 21 dwelling units an acre. So the further we expand it, the lower that number gets, and then we fall out of being in
Right.
compliance.
Right, okay, I get it.
But I drew the map, so.
So you have friends at Swan Pond? I'm just kidding.
So which part of this is
Mhm.
driven or mandated by the state versus what is town? Like you just
Yep.
said you were able to draw, but is the overlay itself mandated with the 1,500 units or whatever that?
Yeah, so
criteria is?
where we put this is, and if it's easier, I can get you some other information just to kind of get up to speed, but essentially, the state has looked at its MBTA communities, so communities that are either along the commuter rail line, communities that are adjacent to the commuter rail communities, transit, which is like Milton was a rapid transit community, comes out to 177 communities.
Mhm.
From there, it's broken down into 4 different categories of rapid transit, central, commuter rail, adjacent, small town adjacent.
Mhm.
So us being a commuter rail community, we have technically 3 transit stations that are within our boundary from a half-mile perspective. So it's Walpole Station, which is the obvious one, Plimptonville, which I'm still asking the state for a definition of why that is included, but we're not touching that. And then Windsor Gardens, a portion of a half mile out from that station
Is Walpole.
is within Walpole. So per the guidelines, essentially what they deem as a buildable location needs to be within half mile of a transit station, a minimum of 50 acres. There's a bunch of other information based upon like what your developable station area is. So like we have 560 acres of developable station area. That's that acreage within each of those 3 half-mile radiuses. And so that number, based upon us being a commuter rail community, we would technically only need 75% of the district to be within a half mile, one of those half-mile radiuses. We have the leverage if we want to have with 25% outside of it. That's going too far in the weeds, so I won't go too far. But basically, what is dictated by the state is that the location, the size, and from there it breaks down guidelines based upon it cannot be restricted. Like it must be from like an age standpoint or a bedroom standpoint. You need to be have the zoning that's allowable for families. So basically, some towns would be like, oh, they can only be 1s and 2s. So you can't place any sort of bedroom count requirement. The affordability requirement we mentioned, the state deems that is like, if you want to do affordable, there's no requirement you have to, but if you want to, you're limited to 10%. And really a lot of it is based upon the tenets of it needs to be no less than 15 to 20 units an acre within a half-mile radius, and you cannot prevent, you can't place like a bedroom count or a housing restriction.
So they mandated that the towns that are within those communities develop an overlay district, essentially within a half a mile of a station.
Yeah, based upon whatever
And then
criteria.
with all that, yeah.
Yep, and you mentioned Milton too, so understanding that in order to kind of enforce this or put towns, to make this enforceable for towns, the law itself, so it's Master General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A, they made a requirement essentially that you would be prohibited for applying for certain grant programs.
Yeah.
The state further expanded on that, and by the state I mean the Attorney General basically further expanded on that to say that not only are you prohibited from applying from certain grant programs, you are susceptible to both federal and state fair housing legal action, essentially.
Mhm.
So that's what Milton.
Yeah, because when they said grant programs, Milton said, fine.
Yeah, and it's a lot more. So like the law lists
But they had a
30.
bigger issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is the thing
And
too.
a trolley that goes a mile and a half.
So while that's not dictated by the law, that was dictated by the Attorney General, because to your point, some communities are probably like, whatever, we'll just pay for it out of general fund, but we don't need to get through these grant programs. So to make it enforceable, they tried to have more of a,
You keep saying enforceable, you keep saying this is what the state wants
Yeah.
to say, but then you say that it's not, there's not gonna be any mandatory build-out or mandatory number that you have to achieve. Is that, am I hearing you right, or no?
there's no construction mandate, it's a zoning mandate. So zoning, there's no like, hey, in 5 years from now.
So this is
As
saying,
currently
they're
constructed.
saying, we need you to zone it like this, just in case somebody wants to build something here.
Yeah, because I think I mentioned a little earlier too, a lot of communities have already thought of, hey, let's improve our downtown by including mixed use. Let's look at areas by, especially communities that have transit stations, trying to incentivize growth there. But there are also communities that are very much, bedroom communities that are restrictive in their zoning, and they don't have any, provision for multifamily. Walpole is not one of those communities. I think we have a pretty good diverse array of housing options, but it's kind of impacts all of us, let's put it that way, in the sense that they had to, when they created this, they were looking at it from a state perspective.
There's no way to opt out somehow if your community really is not that, like Norfolk, for instance?
So
We're gonna put a Union West in Norfolk Center right next to the Federated Church?
that's the thing. We only know from basically how it's written within the law, and then we hear mandates from the Attorney General. So the Milton example is pretty interesting because one, it's they went through that process, they actually got it passed, and then have it come back like that. It's a lot for the town, but also what is the state going to do? So it's an interesting kind of wait and see.
And the planning board still has to approve it regardless.
So the planning board does not necessarily need to approve it. From a legal standpoint, they need to have a public hearing for any sort of zoning article. But I think for Milton's case, in order for them to bring it back, because it technically is denied, the planning board for them would need to be the sponsor of that article. I don't know all the ins and outs
Yeah, I
on
was just
Milton.
curious about Walpole in particular, but.
Yeah, no, it really, the mandate is so much so for the planning board to have a public hearing for any zoning change. They don't need to necessarily endorse something, they do have to have a vote on it though.
So I guess the example that I'm envisioning as reality, given the age of a lot of the properties that fall within this overlay, would be the Gilmore example. Somebody coming in, buying 300-year-old 2 families and putting up another Union West, where it may or may not be appropriate, but the planning board and the zoning board of appeals will have no ability to slow that down. Is that what
Well,
you're
the planning
saying?
board would have site plan review, and if they comply with the dimensional regulations that are listed, then yeah, they wouldn't need any additional.
Are they the same dimensional regs that currently are on the?
Not all. So some of them are been kind of changed, and a lot of that has to do with just looking at making the numbers work. So you bring up Gilmore's. Obviously that's being done as a LIP, a local initiative projects under 40B, but our central business district already has a pretty, in my opinion,
It's pretty robust.
a pretty robust way for a developer to increase. There's no density requirement other than that that gross floor area requirement. So some towns will have like, hey, we have a floor area ratio of 0.7, and we have a dwelling units per acre requirement. You may see a scenario where it's like, hey, you need 30,000 square feet to build, and 2,500 square feet for each additional dwelling unit. So there's a way to kind of like mitigate density, but we don't currently allow it. So
Right.
the interesting thing that comes out of this, and I'm hoping to kind of go into that with the planning board eventually, and when we do a public forum, but we actually have to quantify density with the zoning because we have to show the numbers to the state. I looked at a few parcels that have already been developed. Our numbers come out to a build out that is less than what was actually already approved.
Good.
So it really it's we're in a unique situation. Not every town has that existing zoning.
But not every town needs it. That's what worries me about
Sure.
the state. When the state starts mandating things, they go across the board and they make things very difficult for, quite frankly, something that might be inappropriate.
Mhm.
And another thing I've learned,
Mhm.
I'll say this and then all of a sudden an arrow will come in the room from somewhere. But whenever they say, don't worry about it, don't worry, this is just for now.
Yeah.
That means, think of the worst case scenario, and that's what's gonna happen in 5 years.
Yeah, because it just passed another law
Right.
to add that.
Right. So-
In 5 years, you need to have these many houses.
Right.
Right, but at this point, I think
So
it's-
again, it's nothing that we can
Right.
deal with
Right.
right now, but it just,
Yeah. You're right in the extent that you can't promise anything. I can only explain
Right.
what is the law currently.
yeah.
It makes scenarios like Holden and Milton interesting because they're case examples for other communities that what is going to unfold, because what are the consequences of non-compliance? We only know what it is on paper, we don't know what it actually is going to be for those communities. Because everyone right now
Well,
is...
you also have some communities that are, or previously, in the last decade, have been lobbying to get an extension of the commuter rail.
Mhm.
And now they might be, you know, closer to the Cape maybe,
Right.
and now they might say, oh, screw that.
Yeah.
We gotta do all this, now forget it. We'll just drive to the next town, get on the train. I don't know.
It,
Yeah,
Just
it's gonna be interesting.
it's gonna be
what the-
interesting to
what
see
the
how it plays
outcome
out,
is.
yeah.
So I would say.
the
from
unintended
the-
consequences, right?
Right, the
Yeah.
first pass, right, my understanding was,
Last
Milton
December.
put theirs in, right, for the rapid transit,
Mhm.
and then turned around, but everyone else complied and submitted.
So yeah, so the compliance was meeting the deadline of
Right.
December 31st of this past year. I don't know if they've all been through the AG yet, the Attorney General. So
I
I
thought
mean,
yeah.
they
Yeah.
submitted their compliance to.
At least they submitted them.
They submitted. Basically, it was passed at their town meetings or their town council, and you know they can say, hey, we passed it. It still needs to get reviewed by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities and the Attorney General. So there's basically there's two approvals that you need. You can still get temporary compliance if it passes, but there's a lot of backlog of work. I noticed.
Yeah.
And this overlay that we have drawn out here gives us enough area where we don't have to worry about the issue with Windsor Gardens.
Yeah, so it I know this happened when we had our we had an information session in the fall. Those two other transit locations, those are just showing where you have a transit
Right.
location within your community. It does not mean that you need zoning in all your transit locations. It
Got
just
it.
basically you have the option because you have three
To
transit.
use
If we wanted to,
those.
as long as we
Yeah.
reach these numbers, it could be on one.
You could put
Or
1
split
acre
up
over
through all
there
three.
and 7
Yeah.
acres
You
somewhere
could,
else.
you know, but I think from just a logical
Yeah.
standpoint, it doesn't make sense to do anywhere
Right.
except, you know,
Right,
the
unless you
downtown.
want 6 stories down by the dog rock, that'd be fun.
I don't think,
No?
I don't think they would allow that. So I did that have as a discussion item, but, you know, I know we're missing a few members. I also had talked to the steering committee about maybe having like a stakeholder meeting, especially with the EDC. You know, looking at the downtown, there is kind of an economic impact, from this that is what you want to preserve, so, maybe that's something we kind of can
Yeah.
discuss
Yeah,
for the
no,
March
that would
meeting.
be,
Yeah, let us know what.
Yeah.
it should be an interesting public forum.
Yeah, it's,
Well, as long as the opportunity to explain what it really is versus what we think it might be or hope it's not gonna be,
Mhm.
that will steer that conversation. Because right now, we don't know what it is. We know what we need to do, but we don't know what this means in reality. So there's gonna be a lot of arguments on what reality is, and as long as it's explained up front,
yeah.
I don't think people will have a whole lot of fight left in them.
It's almost stick with the non-reality. but
Right,
they
the
always-
non-reality is
They're
what-
already on
right.
how or what
Right.
versus when, if.
All right, is that everything you have for this part of it? 'Cause
Yep.
While we were doing this and while you were looking at the other thing, I just had a couple of questions that popped up in my head and
Sure.
I don't want to forget.
Sure, I mean, the only other thing was the spring business forum.
Do we even have anyone on the subcommittee in the room right now?
Kevin.
Kevin?
We're in pretty good shape, out of so the spring business forum is booked for the country club. That's on March 28th, 7 to 9 in the morning, so this is the second year of us doing that. I can send you the information on it. The room is booked, deposit's been made. Advertisement has gone out to business emails that I have. I'm gonna continue to kind of, you know, publicize it as much as possible.
Do we not have a good relationship with the Hometown Weekly anymore?
We do, I mean.
I mean, good, but
we-
they used to
we
give
talk
us
to
a
them
lot
every
too.
week.
I do,
Yeah.
personally.
Well, they used to give us a lot, right? Like for Main Street Live and stuff like that, and then they kind of backed off that this last summer a little bit. They kind of, no, we, you know, they wanted us to pay for some things. I don't mind if we have the money, but my point is,
Yeah.
would you see a benefit or foresee any return if we put something in the Hometown Weekly about this event? For businesses that might not be on your list?
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing to do. My only thing is that I like reaching out to the businesses directly, but at the same time,
Well, they might reach out to you though. Hey,
Sure.
I'm new, you don't have my email on your list, I'd love to go, type
I
thing.
think it's a good
Well, it
idea.
could be an article versus an ad, right?
Yeah.
They still
Yeah.
take an article. I thought that's how most of these things are being done as articles.
So, yeah,
I
so
just
it-
reach out and
Yeah.
say,
Yeah, let us write something, you put it in as a headline, as
Yeah.
opposed to an ad, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Just because I know there's a lot going on, and I don't know how old your list is, but,
We get it updated pretty quickly.
Do you?
Yeah, from the clerk's office, so,
so anybody that files for a business license, you get that,
yeah,
okay,
or at least I have to ask, so.
all right.
Yeah. But yeah, that's in a good position, I think, and that's, like I said, until
Yeah.
March 28th. One of the, I think, I really like this, the direction was, having more of a theme in terms of with the speakers. So we're looking at, what I guess you would call it marketing and cybersecurity, especially in social media marketing. Last year was great, I thought, with the speakers, but I think it was kind of interesting to, hey, let's go with a theme every
Yeah,
year
no, that's a
about
good
what
idea.
the topics will be and who the speakers are, so.
Plus it kind of reins in the thought process and the planning.
Right.
Now you have direction,
Yeah,
and, yeah, sounds good.
yeah,
Do you already have
Speakers
some
are set.
subjects lined up, like speakers, they're all set up?
speakers are all set up,
Good.
which is great.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're really just advertising, publicizing it, and eventually, I'll need to get the final headcount numbers at least, I think, a week before, so for the food preparation, but,
Good. Yeah, sounds good.
yeah, so I know it's a lot at once, but if anyone has any questions,
I just have a,
Yeah.
and this is a random question, but
Yep.
it has to do with the zoning. Was the bylaw, I don't remember if it was a bylaw or something that was written that limited cannabis shops in Walpole, and where they could be, where they couldn't be, or even limited them completely, I don't know.
so this was,
Sort
basically.
of as a town vote.
It was a town vote, so when they, in Massachusetts, basically allowed for recreational use to be
Right.
allowed or like,
I remember the whole
legalized.
process, but I don't know what I mean, is it codified? Is it
Yeah.
no way, or is there a way to bring it to a new vote and reverse that if we wanted to?
You'd have to do a zoning amendment, so it's interesting, and, you know, when it was done before, it was voted on as what, not just at town meeting, but I think it was a town vote as well.
Yeah. It was a
pretty
non-binding
sure the-
town vote, wasn't it? Or was it a
I don't
binding?
remember.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the process
Binding, I
now is you
remember.
only need to make a zoning change. You can go back and revisit your zoning. So a lot of towns did basically prohibit recreation. You had to zone for medical. That was a requirement. That's why it's in the industrial district. So the few towns that I know of, and I just know Foxborough recently tried to, it failed, but they did try to rezone to allow for recreational. For sure, you just have to go through as a zoning amendment.
Well, here's the thing. And again, I don't have a skin in the game either way,
Yeah.
but I'll tell you, I could stand in a lot of places in Walpole and hit a golf ball and hit a recreational marijuana shop from Walpole
Mhm.
where we're not getting any money. And these shops are generating, I mean, we're economic development, these shops are generating so much income. And we get to see them, you know, you're in Walpole, and there it is, only it's Sharon, you know? It's like, I mean, I get why the vote and why the opposition was, what was it, like 5 years ago or something like that we did that?
Yeah, about that.
At least,
Maybe
right?
5 days.
2014? Maybe
Yeah.
it's-
Yeah, so
it was
almost
a
10 years
while
ago.
Yeah.
And I get that.
Yeah.
And I still get why people might have pushback,
Mhm.
but I think the reality shows that they're not drug dens. They're not causing more crime. They're not, at least around the area where they are, which is why, you know, even our medical ones, we said they could only be in like manufacturing or limited manufacturing or something like that.
Yeah.
They're only allowed in the industrial park.
So
That's-
down on 1A,
That's
right?
the only.
That's
yeah.
the only spot.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm for or against it, but I think the fact that we are surrounded by them
Yeah.
and the revenue that they're bringing in, and the lack of crime that they've seemingly caused, right? The lack of spillover to underage people. I mean, they have all the data, right? And so I don't think I'm speaking out of turn on this. Why are we letting that revenue go away, or at least not be an option for us when it's surrounding us?
Yeah.
You know, we would not be the only game in town bringing it in. We are just surrounded by everyone else making money.
But didn't someone approach town meeting last year?
Yeah, so.
And then per his legal, because he wasn't as prepared is what I heard, they pulled the request because it would be done on a site-by-site request basis.
So the person that did come forward last year was as a citizen petition, so they were a Walpole
Yeah.
resident. They had experience running stores, I guess you want to call that, in another town. And so they wanted to kind of revisit the bylaw here. They had proposed something before the warrant closed. However, the timing didn't really work out so much on their end because then they got in touch with, I wouldn't say a legal professional, but they got in touch with a professional that has done this process for other communities that have passed the zoning or revisited the zoning. And so when they did that, it was kind of like, oh, I need to change a bunch of things. And so that's why they ended up withdrawing because.
So is what you're saying that perhaps the way to change the zoning or make this happen is a prospective business owner would want to come in and put up a petition to change it so they can open up a facility, or we would generally change it?
Truthfully, something like that, if I prefer it come from the town rather than an outside
More
person.
general thing as opposed to.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, you know, it's if the town is going to be taking a vote on something like that, having it be a citizen petition is fine, but I think it's better to have something kind of fleshed out among the planning board, among the select board like the EDC, because at least that's something that has been like a consensus has looked at it from the town side to want to bring this forward rather than someone from the outside.
I mean, do we have any thoughts about that? You know, do we want to stay out of it? Do we think it's there's no wrong answers.
So
I mean, what do you
my
think?
thoughts are probably similar to your remarks in the sense that it kind of like MBTA, a lot of it is communication and understanding.
Right.
I think there is definitely people's opinion of that use. That's always going to stay. It's not going to matter what you tell them, and that's fine. But there's a ton that those establishments are required to do that far supersedes whatever a town can put in their zoning.
Right.
So you could write the zoning for it, you could think of every possible avenue, they need to comply 10 times more with the state. And that's trying to explain that, oh, you're missing something. No, trust me. Like how they look, their security requirements,
Right.
Inventory, you know, data they have to provide, the taxes, all of it is really, the state dictates that, and that's why
Right.
they look.
And I
Pretty
think
nice.
now we have,
But how much does that fall, sorry, Mark, on the business owner versus what additional work would the town have to do? So to go back on.
I think most of it falls on the business owner.
Falls on the business owner, yeah, the town,
Yeah.
you know, they do get,
The town's the enforcement arm, but I think
Right.
that the business owner has all the responsibility, right?
there are agreements that you do sign with the town,
Right.
I'm mixing up the wordage, but essentially when you go through permitting something like this, you would have to basically, there is
Okay.
a separate agreement besides just like permitting. Like you would with any other use or going through planning board for site plan review, there's an additional agreement, that a business like that, does with usually the select board. But, I mean, that's,
The only reason I bring it up
Mhm.
is because I think there's enough data now from the existing shops that debunks anything that detractors might have in their quiver, if you
Yeah.
will. And given that, if there are potential business owners that want to bring their business to Walpole, I would hate to see older bylaws or whatever they are, restrictions come into play that aren't relevant anymore, you know? So I think I don't know, I don't want to speak for the entire group, but I think it's worth revisiting, considering the fact that marijuana sales outdid alcohol in Massachusetts over the last 2 years. That's saying a lot.
yeah.
Again, it's not my opinion, because I could care less, but it's revenue.
Yeah.
And it's here, so why are we the one last, I feel like we're Custer being surrounded right now, you know what I mean? And everybody else is putting up schools and buying new fire engines, and I know we're doing that too,
We're
but
doing that too.
we could get the money from somewhere else, you
I mean,
know?
I wouldn't say we're surrounded. I mean,
No, we're surrounded. Go to Route 1. Take a ride up and down
well,
Route
that's
1.
That's Route 1.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but you can zone it to,
no, of course that
right, yeah, that's why it's on Route 1.
I'm thinking of
These
like
other
surrounding
counties.
towns, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, Norwood doesn't, and Westwood doesn't. Yeah, but you're right.
No, my point is that you can drive 2 miles, 1 mile,
Mhm.
step 1 foot over the line with your foot, and walk in
Yeah.
and make a purchase.
That would
So,
probably be the pushback from the town, though, would be like, why would we do it here when it's right across other than the
because we
monetary?
want the money.
Yeah.
So why we do anything? I think
Yeah.
we want anything. We're not
I'm
Dover.
not disagreeing, just
No,
saying.
No, that's a good point, and I mean, I remember reading somewhere that because it was, when it was first passed, like Western Mass was big to catch on, and you do have oversaturation somewhat of a use like that, which is interesting because I feel like we have a ton of package stores in Massachusetts. It's like it's our own thing, but they all don't seem to have the same issue.
Sure
and,
they do. If you try to get another liquor store, if you try to get another liquor license for an off-premise store,
Yeah.
the rest of the stores would lose their minds,
Of which they have.
of which they have. They are the first ones to come in and protest that. And if Walpole is gonna add pot shops,
Yeah.
the liquor stores would still lose their minds. They would, and I don't blame them, they're trying to protect their business,
True.
but
I'm
I guess
thinking
the
more
point is
generally
this.
speaking, but yeah.
You know, you're in Medfield, to your point, Norwood. Westwood a little bit, right?
Yeah.
They're all driving through Walpole from 109 to get to Sharon. So stop in Walpole, for God's sakes. I'm just saying, we're leaving money on the table, and maybe someone should revisit that. Now I'll be the guy on the front page of the Hometown Weekly. He wants to bring pot to
I
Walpole.
was gonna say, we're only
You can leave the
Gummies.
Gummies, right?
As long as it could be zoned, but.
I just didn't know how solid it was and how codified it was, where it's gonna be a pain.
No, I'm pretty sure it just requires a zoning amendment. I don't believe it requires another town vote. I don't think it does in the initial time as a town vote, which is kind of odd. But from what I gather from other towns that have revisited it, it was just through zoning. So they're just gonna go to town meeting.
All right. What else do we have? Anything?
That is it. We have minutes, but obviously.
Yeah, we can't do the minutes. But, all right, so what time is it? 6:03, do you have
I'll
anything?
make a
Good.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? No one wants to oppose the meeting ending? Good. Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it.